some empty seats over there. That's fine. That's fine. It looks like these are professors and the students heavily on this side.
Speaker doesn't bite.
Okay, this is our final colloquium this semester. I hope you are all well. And other announcements after today's presentation. We are going to have a little celebration, for Danny and for all of us, with pizza and chicken and beer in the garden. It's a great garden. And so we have the campus garden, and so we're going to have that. And so please don't miss that. And is there anybody who has something to say? No? Otherwise, we will see you back all in the fall, and in this fall, and for the colloquium. Probably Danny is not with us. Okay.
I just have a quick comment. I want to tell you all, some of you, that I was a little bit involved with Sharon Strover's visit. But I couldn't come because my wife was having some back surgery. And she's still in the hospital and has to stay a few more days. But I wanted to be back. And so thanks for your understanding. I would not have missed that other than that. But fortunately, she's doing well and in a good hospital here. So,
well, actually, yeah. Professor Larson was more than a little bit involved. No. Because it wasn't possible, wouldn't be possible without Professor Larson's introduction, and we missed you a lot, and thanks for
it's good to be back.
Yeah. Okay. And probably we don't need a further introduction of Danny, because Danny has been with us for almost a year, and but briefly, Danny is a Stanford stand-up and Fulbright fellow, and a funny guy, and a good speaker in Korean, and also one of our family members of STP, and he's going to graduate as an honorary degree. And his future is still open, wide open, and he will let us know where to go. And today's topic is growing Korea's innovation problem, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, everyone. I am going to try to speak slowly and deliberately so everyone in the audience can hear. But I also have the pressure of a clock and 100 slides to go through, so we're going to try to create a balance between the two. Today I want to talk about three things. I'm going to give a little bit of introduction about the Fulbright program, which sponsored my grant here in Korea. The bulk of my time today is going to be on my research. My kind of larger topic was growing Korea's innovation garden toward decentralization in education and high-tech policy. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about my travels around Korea, some of the experiences I've had since being here. So first, the Fulbright program. J. William Fulbright, senator in the United States, started the Fulbright program in 1946 as a means of creating cultural exchange between the United States and other countries. Since that first program, it has grown to more than 8,000 people per year going between the United States and foreign countries, now 155. What is interesting is that the first English teaching program was started in Korea. Today is the second largest and the top program in the world for United States college graduates who want to study abroad and teach English. For me, I'm on a student research grant. There are kind of three main components to doing that. There's research, language training, and cultural engagement. I've spent most of my time on these two, and that has been kind of on the side of travel around on weekends and stuff like that. No, I cannot take requests for Korean language sentences, but I did pass the class with 3% to spare, 63%. And so today I want to focus most on my research. I really believe that innovation can be described as a garden. It's very fundamental, and today I'm going to go over first the kind of theoretical model that I'm getting at here, and then apply it to the case of Korea as I've studied here on STV. So first, all gardens start with seeds. This is where all plants kind of start from. This is where they form. Don't ask me what kind of seeds they are. They're tiny seeds if you want to know. And in my model, seeds are sort of the startups we see in an economy. They're the first people who go and start a new business. They're the ones who have the vision of what they want to become someday. They have the DNA, the genetic core for what a business is. And as you can see, there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seeds. They're all around us. There are people here at KAIST who are discussing about startups and throughout the world. And some of these seeds get started and they germinate. They start to grow. They go from one employee to a handful, 3 or 4. They might have some revenue at this point. They might be getting clients. In other words, they're no longer just a seed, but there's actually a plant here that we can identify and start to analyze. And some of these germinating seeds become flowers. They bloom into a success. These are companies like Ticket Monster, if you will, in Korea, which will be the sole example I use throughout most of my presentation. Other flowers aren't as successful. They become wilted and they miss their opportunities. And for Facebook and Google and some really exceptional companies, they become really large trees and dominate the rest of the kind of ecosystem. And one of the most important things to understand about innovation and an innovation ecosystem is this funnel. We start with 10,000 companies. 1,000 of them will build products. 100 of them become profitable. 10 may go public. It's 1 in 1,000 if you start a company. It's about a 1 in 1,000 chance that you will actually someday really make money. And if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you're going down to 1, because Facebook is the one from the last 5 years. And so when we talk about why do people start companies, we have to go at the people who actually do these, the entrepreneurs. And there's really a very simple formula for understanding why they start companies. This is sort of in math, so hopefully the humanities people can follow with me. But the probability of beginning a company is a function of 3 things. The probability of success, however it might be defined. The sum of all future profits discounted based on time. So a dollar made today is worth more than a dollar made 10 years from now. And also the opportunity cost. What do you give up in order to start a company? And holding all things equivalent, people are more likely to start a company if the probability of success is higher, if the cash flow they're looking to get is higher, and the opportunity cost is lower. It's very simple. There's not a whole lot more to think about when it comes to kind of why people start companies. So when we talk about probability of success in an innovation garden, first and foremost, I want to talk about policy and talent. This is sort of the dirt or soil in my model here. This in here, you can see, is sort of rich dirt. It's black, it has a lot of nutrients. It's a very supportive environment for a garden. Other places in the world look like this. There's very little moisture, there's very little policy and talent abilities. And so when we think about the environment that companies have to start in, the ecosystem, we have to start with looking at the policy infrastructure. Things like intellectual property, the justice court system, finance, taxes and regulations, many more. The way the government structures the economy, the way the government encourages entrepreneurship or discourages it through its regulations, is a core piece to innovation. In fact, even though entrepreneurs don't put that into the equation, they don't say government is more or less supportive of innovation. It comes into the probability of success. And so when we talk about creating an innovation ecosystem, what we're really trying to get at is how do we create a policy infrastructure that encourages entrepreneurship, that facilitates it without stopping, without literally someone stomping on plants as they're coming up off the ground. Another part to this is finding talent. These are sort of the nutrients in my model. Right? When we talk about Facebook, we talk about Mark Zuckerberg a lot. We talk about Google, it's Larry Page. There's these singular individuals we talk about in public who are kind of the leaders, the visionaries who led these companies. Behind the scenes are literally dozens of other roles that have to be fulfilled. One of the reasons why Silicon Valley remains kind of the largest innovation hub in the world is because we don't just have the best engineers. We have some of the best business executives, designers, marketers, writers, translators, lawyers, accountants, venture capitalists. And all of that has to come together in order to form companies. They all have to be there. And so the soil is the first step. You would not build a company, you would not plant a seed in a garden with bad soil. You wouldn't start a company in a country that has a bad policy and talent environment. But it's not just enough to have soil. There's other things that are required. This is a picture of a bee, in case it's a little too up close. But pollination is very important. The ideas have to move through the economy. They have to be part of the innovation ecosystem. These are advisors, consultants, contractors. And these people are kind of the network that builds all these companies together. In Silicon Valley, these are some of the top people who are these sort of facilitators and networkers. The person on the bottom right has advised 400 different companies who started. The top left, Peter Thiel, he's founded 3 multi-billion-dollar companies. He was the first investor in Facebook, if you saw the social network. And each of these individuals, and there's literally about 20, 25 of them, are part of this network. They're the core nodes that encourage people to start and connect them to the other talent they need in the environment. Another thing here is water, as I like to call it, is money. All right? Plants need water to survive. They need water to grow, to thrive. And if you have too little money, you get this. You get the Sahara Desert. Too little money means there's no companies, there's no growth, there's no seeds, there's nothing really to start it off. But too many people, and this is where my Stanford research really kind of ended, my thesis research, is too much money is a bad thing too. You have to have it in between. A flood is not a good thing. And this might be a little counterintuitive, but when you're starting a company, having too much money can actually be a bad thing. It can mean you're spending too fast. You're not building a business that can work with the profit model that you have developed. Finally, we get to sunlight, which I call attention or publicity, or just the kind of feel that being an entrepreneur and doing something new is sort of exciting, is a draw, essentially. And as you can see here, this is a really balanced kind of ecosystem. You have plants that are kind of growing on the ground floor. You have some successful companies that are these trees. But then there are other forests, if you will, ones that are quite dark inside because the large companies have so kind of overwhelmed all the other plants in the kind of innovation ecosystem. And so this is my basic model. This is what I've been thinking about for a year, kind of distilled into a 10-minute summary given the time constraints here. These are the ingredients. They're the companies, the policy and the talent, the pollinators, these people who create the networks that circulate, the water as finance, and finally this publicity and attention that comes in here. And so when we kind of look at policies that, say, the Korean government proposes or the US government proposes to encourage entrepreneurship, we need to go directly back to this model and look at who is it helping? Is it increasing the probability of success? Is it increasing the amount of money we expect to get? Is it decreasing the opportunity cost? And we can actually break it up and look at each individual component of the policy process and see whether it's actually encouraging or discouraging entrepreneurship. So this is kind of the theoretical model I kind of worked with this year. And I'm going to present kind of the applications, the kind of observations I've made in South Korea, the research I've done in South Korea, and kind of apply it to my own model to kind of show how this kind of functions. And so kind of on a high-level summary, is South Korea this? A beautiful innovation ecosystem with many germaniums all going around? Or is it this? Flower in the desert with Ticket Monster being a flower. And so I want to go over a couple of my research observations. So starting with seeds, which I believe is the most important part that I spent the most time on. I think this is one interesting statistic. This is Hugh Mason, the CEO of a startup accelerator here in Asia. In 2001, 300 teams applied to his accelerator. And he had teams from every single Asian country besides Korea and North Korea as well. North Korea and South Korea were the only 2 countries that did not send a team to this startup accelerator. This is the most prestigious one in Korea.
What does JFDI stand for?
It's actually, I don't think it means anything. Actually,
Really?
It's just their initials.
Oh.
It's jfdi.asia is the company.
Okay.
And the question is, where did these seeds go? And if you look, there's some data here. This is the Times Higher Education rankings for 2001, and the number of universities in the top 250. And you can see that on the right side, the United States, and right behind it, the United Kingdom, have a lot of the top universities in the world, the people who are creating the talent. You can see Korea is down here with number 3. A couple other countries, France, the Netherlands, have about 10 to 12 universities in the top 250. So in one part, some of the talent may not even be here in the first place. And this is kind of borne out in this kind of brain drain problem. But every year there are 73,000 college or high school graduates in Korea who will leave to go to the United States for study abroad, kind of for study. And so what causes people to leave? This is something that I addressed to a Samsung audience 2 weeks ago. And they're trying to figure this out as well. This is really a core problem, and I think yes, you're working on it for the Vietnam case, a lot of the brain drain. This is really the crucial element. Why is it that the United States is so attractive? Why do people leave? And so part of my research, and I won't go too much into the Sunung since many of you probably took this exam, but when I presented to Fulbright, it was a little more interesting. You can see people kind of apparently hit drums when they take the test. People describe this as this Korean SAT. But one thing I want to really emphasize as an observation, I won't get into all the statistics here. The SAT is not a statistical relative mean test. And by that I mean, on these SAT, everyone can get a 2400. It's not actually normed. It can be renormed at times, and it does become renormed, which means they move the average up or down. But this actual Sunung test is based off your relative performance compared to other people who take the test. And this leads to an arms race that just doesn't exist with the SAT. It's actually quite fundamental to the difference between the tests. And so I won't go into all of this, but I think it's very important for Korean students when you're talking about the Sunung, it is not the SAT. It's a fundamentally different test. And it's also like statistically a different test. And this changes the incentives dramatically. On the SAT, you get a high enough score, it doesn't really matter anymore. Whereas in here, you are constantly competing against other students and you want to be better than other students. Another problem with these seeds and where they go, this is the breakdown of international students at KAIST, Korean and international, 95-5. This was 2010 data, and again, Huang, thank you for giving me updated data from 2011. This is very different from, say, Silicon Valley, where 37% of people are foreign-born, and the actual ethnic breakdown skews 1/3 Asian, white, Hispanic, and Black and other kind of come down to the last couple of percentage points. And so I want to talk a lot about who stays then in Korea, and how do we get them to create these seeds to start companies, growing Korea's innovation garden. So one of the things I did back in November, and some of you who were KAIST students probably remember the freshman design program, I was able to go around and talk to every single person who presented, some 150 groups, and interviewed a lot of them, and took photos, hundreds of photos, and talked to a lot of great teams who are actually producing really original stuff. It may not be clear because when you may have done it here, it was freshman year, and it's hard to kind of norm, but for instance, this person on the right, Humin, he created an iPad app that allows you to pull pages out of ebooks and then send them by email or post them online. And what he did is he actually created a really cool page flip animation. So as you flip the page off, you literally like grab the page off the screen. And so I connected him with my recruiter at Facebook to try to get him to work there. Other people do hardware. This was a Japanese, in response to the Japanese tsunami, creating a shelter for people to go out. And basically, in the event of kind of emergency, be able to deploy this temporary shelter and be able to stay indoors. And so, despite the fact that, at least in the United States and a lot of policy circles, and certainly in Korean policy circles, there's this thought that innovation does not happen here in Korea. What I have seen, not just from like freshman design, but talking to students from other universities and across Korea, is there's a lot of innovation that's going on. The issue is not the seeds. There are seeds here. The issue is actually turning those seeds into actual plants, if you will, in my metaphor. And so if you work on innovation policy, if you go into Seoul or MEST or MKE, one of these ministries, and working on these issues, keep in mind that in many cases, the ideas are already here and ready to go. It's more about how do we get those ideas to actually become plans or businesses and people. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. Soil is kind of creating these talent and policy environments. for those also at KAIST, you might know Sparks. It's a computer science kind of club on campus. This is their internal sanctum, if you will, inside the undergraduate library. And apparently they have a no visitors policy, so I have this happen a lot where I have to like go down. I did the same thing at Samsung too, breaking into secret locations like Sparks. But really, this is where a lot of the innovation out of KAIST is going to happen. This is where it happens. They run the course management software at KAIST, which you might be familiar with if you use the Moodle. They're the ones who run it. But they have held 334 technical seminars since 1993. They've held dozens and dozens of seminars where they teach their skills to other people within the Sparks community. And so far, there have been 262 alums, and they've kept track of everyone since 92, or 88, and about 12 a year admitted. And so they're already starting to talk about creating companies, teaching each other new skills. And what I found particularly interesting, coming from Silicon Valley, we're not used to Koreans using the most up-to-date internet technology. We still use Microsoft Internet Explorer 7 and ActiveX and some of the technologies we used back in the 90s. But for Sparks, they program in very modern languages, very modern frameworks, stuff that I've used in the last year. Python, Django, and other programming languages. And that's really fascinating to me. That even though, say, Korea as an environment does not actually use these technologies, they're actually staying on the forefront of the technology that's happening in Silicon Valley. And that's really exciting, because that means that they can go out and work on a startup today and make kind of things happen. Another component of this kind of soil here in Korea are actually corporate programs. Both Apple, Samsung, and other cable in Korea, this one's at Gwanghoon, and that one I think might be Gwanghoon as well, actually create these kind of programs to teach students how to code and kind of build up the talent flow that's coming through in these schools. So for instance, the Samsung Talent Program at Gwanghoon actually teaches students in classes. They actually hold classes and seminars, again, kind of like Sparks, on modern technologies that they need to work at Samsung. And that's really exciting, because even if they don't work at Samsung, those skills are portable. They're able to take those skills and work somewhere else. And so it's sort of a gift to students who are able to take in this, while also being a marketing program. And Samsung goes actually one step further. This is SGen Club. I don't know how many people are familiar with kind of the club network at Samsung. But this is the primary recruitment tool at Samsung to be recruited. The main goal of these clubs is talent development. There's 8 of them in Korea and most of the major cities. And SGen Club, which is one of these, it has 52 students along with 20 who are high school students. And basically what this club does is they do 4 projects over 2 years. They get paid a salary. They work with vice presidents at Samsung. They get a free laptop, a lounge, some tuition reimbursements. Basically a huge number, and a major thing for a lot of people is 95% chance of actually getting a Samsung full-time tenured job on the other side. And what these clubs do is it's basically starting to create this talent flow within Korea. And to me, I think this is actually very unique. I proposed to Google to do something very similar to this as a means in the United States. There's a way of getting students who might otherwise not choose computer science, or choose computer science and aren't prepared to kind of be an entrepreneur, and teaches them sort of entrepreneurial skills that they may not learn in a university setting. And what's great about kind of this club, and you can see it from the picture, it's actually very social. I think this is a really important part of creating these networks. Sparks, these kind of university-based programs, these club programs, all create networks between people. You learn from one another. And that's kind of the hallmark of a great entrepreneurial environment, is where people learn their own talents and then teach others. That's crucial. And when you kind of look at government policies, oftentimes they focus on, say, a professor down to a student, or an administrator giving out documents. But really what you want is person to person, not top down, when it comes to these kind of learning environments. So let's move on out of the soil and policy environment. Now, I did skip policy environment because there's a lot there. Actually, I spent about 2 months on the political economy development, but I know that a lot of you covered kind of these topics, I think in your class with Midi and the Japanese Miracle, and Scott Callan's book on Divided Sun. And so I don't want to go necessarily in this because all of us are in STP.
I'd like to see your take on those.
Okay.
But that's okay.
Yeah, well, if you can ask a question if you don't get the floor will be open. Third, I want to go over is these pollinators and advisors. There are actually startup conferences in Korea. I went to one. It's called the Startup Weekend. You might have seen it. Basically, at this conference, a lot of people come together and build companies on a weekend. It's a 48-hour hackathon, as we call it. So people form teams at the beginning of it, and they basically program a product to conclusion, and there's a, kind of a ranking at the end about who did really well and who did not. At this Startup Weekend, which was in Daejeon, there were 150 participants, and 38 startup companies launched at this event. And I won't go too much into the idea, but some of them, like this one, would be having men get women's recommendations on clothing, since the idea is that you don't necessarily want to look good for men, you want to look good for women. So it'd be a shopping site in which the other gender would help select your own clothing for you. Another person, which I thought was very Korea-centered, would be to follow their hair salon when they change from hair salon to hair salon, your hairstylist. So if you have, like me, I have this beautiful red hair, and I have a wonderful stylist. If he moves, I want to be able to track him as he goes around. So it's kind of a hairstylist social network of sorts. And so I thought it was really cool here, coming from the outside, and kind of seeing what people are coming up with, because they weren't just coming up with ideas that are kind of in the air. They're coming up with ideas that solve real problems that, say, Koreans had in their everyday lives. And that's really important, because that's where good companies come out of. I went through all 38 ideas and translated them, and that took a few days with the help of a dictionary. It didn't help that a lot of them were written by engineers who did not use the most correct grammar in Korean. But I did manage to figure out what most of the ideas were. And I have to say about 2/3 of the ideas I thought were quite good. As someone who kind of goes into investment and looking at companies and that sort of business, I was quite impressed with the kind of level of the ideas that were available here. Now, this is something that I thought was one of the more interesting parts, the water, if you will, in this model: finance, venture capital. What is Korea's venture capital industry like? To give you some numbers, there are 116 venture capital firms in Korea today. There are 419 funds, and there's a lot of won. 9,492 billion won. And hopefully someone understands what that value is. It's $2 billion equivalent. And if you look at the last 10 years for venture capital flow, you'll see that the amount of won, the amount of won that has kind of flowed through venture capital here in Korea has remained about steadily increased almost the entire time. In fact, you'll see that it plateaued from 2005 to 2007 and then quickly increased. My theory is that as the housing market in the US collapsed in 2008, investment in new enterprises became kind of a better investment opportunity than some of the other investments that were possible. And when we look at, say, the targets, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, in Korea. This is where the money is going in Korea. This is based on the number of companies invested. You'll notice that information technology back in 2002 was basically the dominant area in which people invested money in. But that has really collapsed. It's gone down by more than 50%. The one that has really gained is culture and content. And this sort of tracks a little bit the US kind of approach in the last 10, 12 years, where sites like Facebook or Pinterest are sort of taking the lead in investments. But you'll also notice that Korea has still a lot of money going into manufacturing, which is something that is not the case in the United States. We don't really use venture capital as much in manufacturing. So that even last year, there's still 100 companies, more than 100, almost 150 companies, getting venture capital funding to do manufacturing. So a very unique part of the Korean kind of venture capital ecosystem. The last one I think is the most disturbing, though, and this is something that is very concerning for me. This is the stage at which a venture capitalist is investing in a company. Early stage is a handful of employees, maybe no profits. Expansion stage is the middle stage. This is when a company is growing from, say, 5 to 250 to 300. And then later stage is when you're basically done, you're going on the market, it's an established company. And you'll notice that since in the last 10 years, the amount of early stage investment has sort of decreased, and particularly the later stage investment has increased quite a lot. It's gone from 125 to 200, almost a 67% increase. And that's very concerning, because the money to be made is in the early stage. Late stage companies don't make kind of the large percentage growth that you would want in a venture firm. People are basically, to summarize this, people are playing it safe in Korea. They're investing in companies that are already going to guarantee them money, as opposed to investing in companies that are more, say, early stage, and so they're more risky. And in order for the finance, this water, to be useful to these seeds, it has to go to more companies. In last year, there's only 245 companies in the early stages that were actually given money. And that is terrifically low. That is quite low. So I think when it comes to, I don't know if there's a policy reason behind this. It's really hard for me to kind of read Korean policy and law for a lot of reasons besides my Korean language skills. But one of the things I think is important to look at is looking at investor protection, looking at the rules these funds operate under, the legal and fiduciary responsibility, the finance responsibility to spend money correctly, because this is very concerning to me, and one of the more interesting things I learned while in Korea. But I want to give a quick comparison between the United States and Korea. The United States has 181 funds last year in 2001. Korea had 67. The United States had 19 billion. Korea had 2 billion. What's really interesting about this is if you look at the GDP size between the United States and Korea, this is actually on a per dollar basis about equivalent. And to me, I think that is extremely fascinating. Because when we think about the United States as this innovation powerhouse, and the United States, Korea, and Asia in general is not innovative, it's actually not the case. There is money. And whether that money is being spent as well as it could be, whether it's being spent early enough or late enough, maybe is a different question, but the money is certainly there. There's not really a need to kind of encourage more venture capital investment in Korea. I'm going to give a quick, I mentioned Ticket Monster. This is your success story, one success story in the last 2 or 3 years. Who's used Ticketmon? T-Mon. A couple people have used it, so I think there's a guy, picture of a nice guy outside their office building, the CEO, Daniel Shin, who founded it. This is where it was founded in 2010, and a year later sold for $350 million, and had 600 employees at the time. And when we talk about the kind of future, profits that are possible, the function we talked about earlier, this is really crucial. We call these exit opportunities. An exit could be going public, so then selling your company onto a stock exchange. But a lot of startups in the United States actually do exactly this. They sell. This is, in this case, Ticketmonster sold to Living Social, a company that does kind of local deals, which is what T-Mon did so, kind of for the Korean market. These are very important because this is the easy way out. It's really hard to get all the way to a public company. It takes 6 to 7 years. In this case, it took 18 months. And one of the major kind of policy issues in Korea, there's still a lot of rules that prevent foreign investors from removing money out of the Korean market. If they invest, like say I, a United States citizen, invests in a Korean company and it kind of sells this way, it is not always possible for me to actually get my money back as a foreign investor. And so one of the crucial things, again, as part of the soil and this finance, this water, is actually creating the kind of system that allows foreigners and people locally to invest safely in companies and know that if there is exit opportunities, they will come out. And finally, this is more of a joke slide, but how much sunlight is there in Korea? And my response was there's none. There isn't a lot of attention placed on startups in Korea. There is a small community. But I do have Google alerts on both Korean and English, and there's just not that much talk about how to create innovation. There's not a lot of people discussing it. There's not a lot of what we call angel investors, people with a lot of money who donated into in sort of innovation investment. And so while I think that this is kind of the last bit, if you had seeds, you have water, you have soil, everything else, the sunlight will come. But at the same time, it's important to start drawing attention to the work that is being done. So in summary, I'm going to go over this rational innovator model, again, kind of from economics. Getting the probability of success high, I think, is the most important. And that means having exit opportunities, making sure that companies can sell. In the Korean case, it's really hard to sell your company because Samsung usually copies it. In fact, Samsung has a corporate policy of copying startups that they see as possibly being successful. And that means the probability of success for entrepreneurs is really low. Because if you are successful, large trade will tend to try to either steal your idea or underpay you. this also affects kind of the profits you can expect. And that's kind of unfortunate. So in this kind of garden diagram, Samsung and LG are kind of these large trees that hide everyone underneath and kind of suck up all the resources. It's not necessarily that they're, say, evil or they do it purposely, although sometimes they do. It's far more likely the case that unintentionally, based on their size and their kind of market power here in Korea, they sort of just push out the startups that are out there. And that's unfortunate. So my kind of policy approach for South Korea, kind of in summary here, focus on these two things, because the opportunity cost is already fairly low. Increase the probability of success for companies by changing the policy environment, encouraging better exit opportunities, and increase the expected payout. And that means kind of defending investors, making sure that the system is working on behalf of companies to be successful. So that's kind of the research summary I wanted to give today. And of course, all of you was asked to give a lot of time for questions, so I'm going to do that. So do have some questions for me. But that's sort of the summary of kind of the overarching approach I took to the research this year. Lastly, I want to go over some of my travels around Korea. I have traveled to a couple of different places across Korea. Maybe some of you are from these hometowns. Chuncheon apparently is the land of Gyeongsik. And I have gotten to see a lot of cool things, and I also got to visit Singapore. And so in the last kind of 4 minutes here, I want to kind of go show 10 quick photos from my travels around Korea, just to give you a flavor of the other side of Fulbright research grants, which is not just about research and book reading and reading documents, but also talking to people and going around the country and both learning about Korea and also teaching about the United States as well. One of my first trips in Korea was to the International Business District, Songdo in Seoul. I got off on the Incheon #1 line, and I reached this point out of the stairs and onto a gravel and weed-filled sidewalk. Korea is really fascinating to me. You have the ability to build these cities. This is Sejong City, literally growing out of the ground. It's literally an innovation garden of buildings, if you will. And I find it really fascinating and a really great kind of approach. At the same time, it's important to realize that it's not about the buildings, it's about the people. And we talked about seeds. The seeds don't come out of buildings, they come out of educational institutions and these networks that are built. I also got to be involved a little bit in Korean politics. This is the FTA debate up in Seoul. I was observing and telling people I was Canadian. And at one point, I figured out eventually that they were protesting me. So I felt it best to kind of say something else. At one point, they sort of closed off the protest group. You can see the Korean police are aimed away from me. They were kind of pushing everyone back, and then I managed to get around them. And then they kind of pushed everyone out with water cannons and tear gas shortly after I left. So that was a little bit of a different experience here. But I also got to see the election going on a couple of weeks ago in Tokyo, both with different parties and sort of these mobiles that travel around the country is very uniquely Korean, or maybe uniquely Asian, I don't know. We have nothing like that in the United States. Nor do we have a lot of Ajuma in a dancing troupe, basically, in front of Daejeon Station. They had a lot of great songs, and I actually caught on to a couple of them I was singing that night. So kind of learning a different side of how you can do kind of political campaigns. Earlier on, I got to go to the Yonsei versus Korea games, or
Who won?
I don't know who won.
Okay.
What I was watching it with them, and what I would do is I would go up to a different group because they were all wearing the same colors, so it was really easy to identify. And I'd be like, Korea! And I'd get a big cheer from the Korean side, and then I would run to the other side of the street and go, Yonsei! And this was very exciting until they figured out I was doing it, and they got angry. And then I got to see kind of a demonstration, Taekwondo, some people being kicked in Korea. So seeing another part, martial arts, which is not, I think, a large part of the United States. And also a celebrity. I don't know if you know who this is. This was in Iwa, or Ide, as I was walking around. He was walking around as well and being trapped. Like 200, 300 people were like following behind him. I didn't know what was going on, so I took a photo like everyone else.
Who is he?
He's a comedian. That's all I know. Who is he? Hummingbird. And so he was doing some funny things where he would go up to women and be awkward. So that was quite funny. I also got to do some traditional Korean kind of culture. This is a Sona table. So now,
설날.
Solar?
Lunar New Year.
Yeah, Lunar New Year. And so got to be a part of this event, and as some of you have heard, learned some of the gender kind of segregation rules that were going in place here. All the men in the family ate first, and then all the women ate 30 minutes later as a respectful thing.
Whose house?
A friend of mine who in Seoul, so it was a very large table. And there's candles. I think you can kind of see. I guess you all know this. I don't have to go through. This is Gwangju. I don't know if you know this street. Apparently, it's very famous in a drama or two, and kind of democracy. Another travel up into Singapore. I took 300 pictures of monkeys while in Singapore. But I think the top travel, and this is my last photo from these 10. My favorite is my trip to Korea's Tundra Island, Jeju Island. It was not the best trip, but Jeju Island is a volcanic island, and one of the great things about that is all the rocks are black, the stone is white, and it really does create some really beautiful moments, even when you're freezing parts of your body off with it. And so I want to give a final message to everyone here in STP and at KAIST. Not only thanks so much for being a wonderful home and allowing me to be here in your family for the last 8 months, but fortune favors the bold. And the people who are most successful in the future have big ideas, they fail large. I'm really inspired by the quote by Larry Page about Google, which he said that the people don't realize that it's really hard to fail completely. And that if you have a big enough idea, even if you fail, you will have more success than if you had just success doing something normal. 1% of $1 billion is a lot more than, say, $10,000. And so when you're thinking about your own careers, when you're thinking about your own research, be ambitious, do big things, change the world, because that's what really makes it a worthwhile experience. That's who changes. These are the titans of industry, of academia, and that's my message again. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Where is your nightlife in Aundong? I saw you a lot. But it's so clean and it's so sober. And
Well, I don't know. I don't need to drink to not be sober.
yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And now floor is open for discussion.
Well, I have, first of all, Danny, you and we're going to have to do a debriefing. Because I have so many ideas after listening to your presentation. And Danny, it isn't the Stanford connection, that he did his degree there or anything, but it's Fulbright, where I worked for 15 years, and also I was a Fulbright grantee, so we have that in common. But I thought your brief observation about the SAT versus the Sunamshiam is very interesting, because I'm currently working as a consultant to the College Board, which is looking at trends here in South Korea, and this relates in a very interesting way. And the other thing, just a final comment, I can't begin to touch on everything, but some of the people that I had the privilege to meet starting back in the early 90s, who were instrumental in Korea's remarkable ICT growth. Starting in the 1980s and through the Seoul Olympics, and then the decision in 1993 to go with CDMA and so forth, and now coming all the way up. But some of those people that I was introduced to, for example, Dr. Lee Young-tae, the founder of Sampo, Crichton Computer, he was an evangelist in terms of venture capital. And a number of other people who surrounded him at very high levels way back then were saying, we need to bring this model to Korea. So anyway, Danny, I'll say it publicly. I hope that you, wherever your path takes you, my recommendation would be that I hope you develop this research, write a book or two, and because there's not enough being done to the whole world is now involved in this innovation process. I mean, innovation does take place in Silicon Valley, but it's really, and I think this came through in your presentation, it's a global phenomenon, especially when you get into various types of apps for smart TV or you name it. But excellent presentation. I enjoyed it. I'll get together with you.
Okay. I'll make two quick comments. One is I gave part of this presentation, the research part, to the Fulbright Forum up in Seoul, which are mostly English teaching assistants, but also some other people in the Seoul area. And one of the things that everyone commented on was this little bit on the Sunnah. And I think when you do your own research in academia, and you have these sort of little black boxes, in my case, I don't know anything about the college entrance exam or how it's scored. Look into these little black boxes, because sometimes you'll be surprised at what you find. In this case, I was surprised that the Korean SAT was nothing like the SAT, and that the nomenclature was totally different and not kind of correct. And I never would have known that if I didn't spend the 3 or 4 hours kind of going through old test scores on Dongha, Ilbo, trying to understand the Korean and know how it's all built to be able to do that. The second piece, and you kind of alluded to it by saying apps, the startup community didn't really exist until 2009 with the introduction of the iPhone in Korea. With the iPhone, people can build apps in their own living rooms or dorm rooms or apartments, I guess. You don't have living rooms. Apartments. And in Korea, many of the first entrepreneurs here who came out of this actually came from the iPhone. The ability to just distribute your product out without interference from any other company or any other large table. You could just do it. And so a lot of the companies that have started in Korea come from the mobile side of it. That's even where Ticketmaster comes from as well. And so I think that that's actually a lot of focus and a lot of, for you, if you're interested in this topic, to kind of look at that. Because that's where I think the Koreans are really focusing on today.
You know, this, I just learned literally within the last couple of days, according to Nielsen data, that there's a lot of interest in the Facebook IPO. So all the international... I was driving home from the hospital 3 days ago, and I got a telephone call from a BBC radio correspondent in London saying, "Is this Professor Larson?" And I ended up talking with him about the Facebook IPO, and they were interested in what's going to happen in Asia, in Korea, in China. What's the longer-term prospect? And so I did a little more digging. And if you go to Korean Click, which is AC Nielsen's affiliate here, as of January, February this year, usage of Facebook exceeds that of Cyworld, mini homepage. So, I mean, that kind of blew my mind, because the world hasn't really caught up with that yet, that's happening in Korea. This is enough from the professor side of it.
Yeah.
Thank you for the fascinating talk. I know I've enjoyed your year in Korea. I really like. I find your model of the innovation garden, the garden model, very interesting. One of the things that I found interesting is that there are few animals in the garden. There are bees for pollination.
Yes.
But other than bees, you don't have animals there. And then there, this relates to my question that the trees that you think of as successful companies do they correctly represent what they are actually, especially in Korea? So there can be a serious debate about whether Samsung, LG, and they are just big trees living harmoniously with other plants, or they've already turned into large animals.
Large animals and
even dinosaurs, because they have the power to to kill plants. They can suck up the seeds. They can block sunlight if they will. I mean, they can do everything with the plants and our soil. They can dry out the soil. They have all the colors. And then your slides about the S-Gen group. And really, it seems to me that they are really sucking up the seeds from the bottom. Even the high school students, they're getting all the bright plants from around the country. So, could you comment on that? I mean, are they just large trees, or are they even like dinosaurs?
There's
sucking on other.
It's kind of related that I just found out that it's almost impossible to put conglomerates, the big companies, into this picture in this country, because it literally dominates a lot of things. So I was thinking whether how you're gonna put those companies into this picture.
So I think it's an intentionality kind of difference. In some cases, these companies are harming the environment by benignly, by just existing and just kind of taking these talent. And obviously, when I do interviews, I actually stopped doing this, but I used to ask people, like, what company do you want to work for? And it's always Samsung Electronics. I felt very few engineers who don't say that, even among the startup people. In fact, the most common case for people to leave startups is actually to build a startup so that Samsung acquires them and so they get a job at Samsung. And one part, I think that side of the equation is these large trees sucking up nutrients. I do think, yes, that the scale difference is extreme. I don't think that there is a country, not even Japan today, not even China, that has this level of kind of concentration of a handful of companies over the entire economy. And so they're really, really, really large trees. But as the person I worked at, one of the VPs at Samsung, said, they're hollow trees. And one of the interesting things that Samsung is dealing with, and I talked to Gwanghoon a little bit about this, is Samsung is really worried about existing in 2020. So even though they may be a predator, maybe they're an old predator, maybe they're an animal, and I do think this metaphor actually extends very far. You didn't already figure that out from my talk, but I think this metaphor works really long term. I think it's, again, intentionality of whether you're trying to destroy, whether you're just sort of benignly taking away the nutrients so something can't grow in the first place. But when it comes to Samsung itself, there are really large problems that are behind the scenes that I don't think are discussed very much, mostly because Samsung owns the media. There's a talent flow that's leaving Samsung. There is a fear that the number of businesses that Samsung makes profit off of are disappearing. And internally, Samsung makes most of its profit from a handful of products. And those products are highly competitive, and they are not in industries that Samsung is particularly good at. In other industries that they make less profit, like DRAM, refrigerators, are ones that are going to get caught up in China and other cheaper manufacturing places that will kind of press them from both sides. And Samsung is very, very frightened that they're going to become Sony and disappear. Sony's dying right now, basically. And so basically my presentation to them and their global strategy team was essentially how to solve that problem. And I am not optimistic. So it might be the case that this tree falls, in which case a lot of this talent will free up. Just like a real rainforest and a real environment, the nutrients don't just disappear. They go back into the soil. There's now new sunlight and there's new growth. So that's the way kind of the innovation should work.
I was wondering whether you had a special reason why you chose Ticketmaster for a success case, because I was taking a venture and entrepreneurship last year by Professor Lee Min-hwa. He's one of the first entrepreneurs in Korea, and the discussions we had in the class was mostly about Ticketmaster as a special case because, well, the Daniel Shin, he is also a cousin, I guess, of the wife of Samsung's king, Lee Young-hee. So he had other sources of money, which is not the same for the other entrepreneurs. So I was wondering whether you had special, like why you chose Ticketmaster for a special that intention, and also I was for that course. What we did mainly was about educational side, what the KAIST or Seoul National University or other universities have to do to promote students, especially engineers, to to start up a company. So whether I was wondering whether you have that kind of aspect.
Sure. So on the Ticket Monster, I guess it was the speed at which it grew. It was one of the fastest kind of multi-$100-million companies in kind of recent Korean history. That doesn't include kind of Naver and Dow and some of the older companies. But in terms of a mobile-based kind of company, it is one of the major success stories. And it's also because it went to the American side, so there was a lot of research on in English on kind of that company. In terms of the actual funding coming from Samsung, I'm not bothered by that at all. Rich people in the United States donate money to startup ventures all the time. And sometimes it's by blood relations, sometimes it's just business relations. I think that actually is a really positive thing. It's sharing the wealth around. And that means resources are going back into the environment rather than being held in a bank or buying a baseball team, which apparently happens a lot here in Korea. And I think one of the very first parts here is if you really want to create an environment, you don't need a lot of people. You do need someone with a lot of money who can actually get this started. Because they're the ones who are going to push hardest to actually build these companies. They're the ones who, as an investor with their own money, they want these companies to succeed. And I think that a lot of Korean investors have not figured out that the United States uses what we call a spray and pray model, in which we give money to 150 companies and we hope 5 are successful. And because these companies are just really successful at the end, it doesn't really matter which 5 they are. It's a wonderful investment. On average, venture capital firms in the U.S. make 6.5% per year in interest, which beats most banks. And so I think part of building this kind of environment, which the schools can be a part of, if I were to solve any one problem, though, I think it's the exit opportunities. And that's what I'm getting at here. It's just really hard. Like, even if you have a successful company in Korea, it's really hard to actually make money. It's hard to go public in Korea. In the case of Ticket Monster, I use that as the example because it was sold to an American company, which is a really quick way to actually realize a return and be done. But for most Korean entrepreneurs, there's really no endpoint. The endpoint is getting hired by Samsung or LG. And so we would call that a lifestyle business and not an actual growth style business. And I'm not sure that the universities have too much of a role to play in that. Someone just has to get it started. That kind of philanthropic, but also investor kind of savvy approach to it is really important. We call them angel investors, if you want the term.
Your theory is based on the Silicon Valley model, which is dominated by the IT industry. So do you think that that model or venture capital system can be applied to other various kinds of industries other than IT?
Let's see if I can get this really fast. This one. I want to emphasize one thing about Silicon Valley. Software is 7% of Silicon Valley's economy. It's something that's not well known, and I think is one of my favorite statistics I like to put out. When it comes to the actual GDP of Silicon Valley and where people work, it's 7%. The vast majority is kind of community, which includes everything from fast food to healthcare to government. But when it comes to the actual innovation, which is the colors here, a lot of it is business infrastructure and enterprise software and enterprise hardware. Manufacturing is still a large part of it. And information product and services, which is not kind of the IT side of it. A different part of it. And when we talk about kind of, I think the attention that Silicon Valley gets is always Mark Zuckerberg or Google or these companies. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of other companies like Oracle, Microsoft even, which is partly in Silicon Valley and partly in Seattle, Washington, that actually drive a lot of the actual money that goes through Silicon Valley. Because in the end game, people pay for enterprise software, they pay for these kind of manufacturing, whereas a company like Facebook still barely has revenues. They make $1 per user per quarter. That's how much they make off of all of it. $4 a year. And so I just want to kind of correct the notion that Silicon Valley is all about software. There's a lot going on that we just don't hear a lot about. When it comes to the actual model, I do focus on the software model because that's my background, being an engineer in Silicon Valley. I do think the model works. It just means some of the actual parameters have to be fine-tuned. So, for instance, in manufacturing, you can't give $10,000 as an initial investment. That's just not going to buy you anything in terms of capital. If you want to build a factory, it takes a lot more money up front. And so, the numbers change how we grow. We don't start small and go big. You sort of start big and grow bigger. And so I think the model can work as long as it's not done religiously or done dogmatically, very simply. Like, don't just apply it. I think the model in a more general sense can work in every kind of technical engineering investment kind of venture.
Can I just pick up on something that Gia mentioned about education? Because it sounds as if education is a minimal role is being played here when it comes to some of the things like, your example was a freshman design course, which is a really good example because here we've got a course that really is no longer running. It seemed to have a lot of potential. I taught on it last semester and went to the same poster fair that you went to. And I saw that app about the page turning app. But it seems that you're saying that the seeds are really kind of already there. That's not the problem. So, is that true? Should we be so complacent? Because, in KAIST at least, there is this kind of worry that we might lose those kinds of, innovative forms of teaching, and we shouldn't take for granted that the seeds are just there. I know it's probably not what you're saying, but what do you see? Could we do something more positive and directed to thinking about the kinds of education that we could use to encourage the seeds?
I absolutely agree that there is, when it comes to probability of success, the more people who start companies, the more likely one of them is successful. And so encouraging as many people as possible to give it a try is going to work. What I'm emphasizing, I guess, in this presentation is if the exit opportunities, if the ability to start these companies and be successful is higher, you will just get students who go in that direction in the first place. One of the interesting things I have found from interviewing students, not just KAIST, but Gwanghoon and other universities in Seoul, and basically, Gwanghoon is kind of the lower end of the schools that I interviewed. I also interviewed in Seoul and Yonsei. Students are kind of ready to do this. They like what they see. They like kind of the independence. One of the things I didn't really think about, but there's a lot of hierarchy working at a place like Samsung or LG that doesn't exist at a startup company because you're one of only one or two people. There's not really a hierarchy there. And so there's a lot of incentive for students to go and do this. And so the main thing I think that's holding them back is, can they actually somehow be successful someday? In terms of the people here, I think STP is a great first step. One of the things we really emphasize in Silicon Valley is it's not just the engineering and the technical that matters. It is the full spectrum of abilities. I emphasize that on the kind of the 16 different roles that a company has to do, but most of those roles aren't technical. They're things like internationalization. How do we make a product for different countries simultaneously? Facebook operates in 170 countries. How do you make a product that does that? That's culturally aware, that's culturally sensitive. How do you translate the like button? Or the poke? What's a poke in other languages? That might be, if you go to, say, Saudi Arabia, a poke might actually be offensive. It might actually be a real problem. And so a large part of this is the humanities play a huge role. And so one of the things you might consider coming out of this program as an idea, Stanford runs, starting last year, a program called Bibliothèque. TECH, so off the French, a little pun there. What it is about getting humanities PhDs and humanities students into tech companies and what kind of role they can play. And it's teaching the case study of like Intel has an anthropologist, actually several of them, who investigate how people use technology. How do people interact with their computers? And what does Intel have to do to make sure they're building products for those kind of computers? And so I think if you want to see an example of where a university could work well, that might be a way to model something you could actually do right here, right now, of teaching people both, that humanities matters to this enterprise, and then how does it matter? And coming from a background of not just engineering but also history, I think it's definitely a combination that matters, and getting that formula out there is really important.
the other side of it is, there's a lot of people who are trying to think about the innovation process itself, and how we could describe that, how we could encourage it. And there's traditionally, I don't know where this is going now. I hear innovation used a lot. I don't hear a specific sort of definition of what that is. We don't need a specific definition, but we do need some idea of what it is. We recognise it when we see it, but we don't necessarily have a very good theory of what it is, although there is a tradition of thinking about that in cognitive psychology and philosophy. You've probably got a slide.
I go with a very broad definition of innovation, which is value added. And I give a lot of different examples for this. So you can create hardware, like the Google Glasses. You can build a software company. You can create new laws that are more innovative, that work faster, that require less resources. You can be an artist, changing the way we perceive the world. And you can also, and this is the last example, you can also be innovative in your own life. You can find a French toast restaurant that's really awesome in Gangnam. That was the expression I had when I found out they had French toast. And I think it's really important to realize I have a really expansive definition of innovation. Innovation is almost everything that improves something. It improves the way you operate. If you find a new bus route to work that saves you 10 minutes, that's innovative. You just got 10 more minutes in your life that you didn't have before. And so I think if we instill the notion that you can constantly improve every facet of your being, every interaction you have, that's really empowering. And when it comes to Korean students, I think the main thing, and this is why I said fortune favors the bold, I think there's a fear that it's not me. And I think what freshman design did, in the past tense, was kind of encourage students to realize that they can actually be successful, that they can actually build a product, that what seems impossible to do, like these Google Glasses, is not actually in the end impossible. That real people have built everything from a space shuttle that took a man to the moon to Facebook that integrates 1 billion people every day and literally feeds millions of pages a minute. And I think as long as you're teaching that possibility, which I think is what higher education does really well, it's showing what is possible, I think you're doing your job and doing it really well.
Thanks very much for your taking us the trip you have made in this country. I enjoyed it very much. And I've got 2 questions. It's very interesting model and very easy to understand. But when you talk about the pollinator, you showed us a picture of the very, I don't know, famous persons. But in case of, when we first explain the model, but when you apply it Korea, it's very, very fast. You are very quick to, kind of pass over. So I was wondering whether you could be more specific about the role of pollinator. And I am not aware of this venture capital activity in Korea, and your concern about the nature of venture capital investment in later stage. I was wondering whether the structure of the venture capital is different from the United States, because a lot of venture capital in Korea is mostly a institutional venture capital. It's not, I don't know, the philanthropic, the individual sort of wealth men or women in the United States. So whether you have that information.
So when it comes to the pollinators, I think I focus on Startup Weekend and some of these conferences where these networks sort of form. But one of the large issues that I don't know if it's from me being a foreigner going into Korea, I don't see people who are sort of the ringmasters or the leaders of the startup world here in Korea. The people I show are 6 of 30, and these people everyone knows them. If you're in Silicon Valley, you know who these people are, because they are everywhere. They're being interviewed constantly. They are helping hundreds of companies in their lifetime. And I don't know of people here specifically who are at that same level. I don't know if that's, I would blame most of that on the Chaebol system. I don't see Igani going around and really pushing a lot of startups, or even like say his sons or other people in the Samsung family. Maybe someone like An Chul-soo. has seemed to be a little bit there, but I don't see him being this kind of just evangelist for startups and entrepreneurship in and of itself. And so I breezed over it mostly from it's not as much there and it's less that I can see.
Who are these people? Who fund their activity? They themselves, they fund themselves, or association, they create association, the business person, who are they?
Most of them are former people who have started their own companies and were successful. So on the top left was Peter Thiel. He started a company called PayPal, which you might use to do financial transactions. One on the bottom right who has really helped like 500 companies. He started LinkedIn. You might be familiar with. And a lot of them are just people who are former business leaders who have sold off their companies or were CEO and then left, and they wanted their kind of what do I do next moment. And there's a real culture of people in Silicon Valley giving back. Everywhere from back to Hewlett-Packard back in the 30s and the 50s and 60s. They founded HP, and then they helped literally tens of other people, including Steve Jobs, who got his original push to start Apple from Hewlett-Packard. I think there's just this culture of constantly giving back and building a community because these people received help themselves. And they realized that without the help they got to get started, it would never have worked out. And so they feel that it is their responsibility and they have kind of a duty to do the same. I don't know how you start that. That first round of people, like I said, I think there just has to be one person who kind of just does it. They don't have to be the richest person in Korea, but they should, a couple $1 million is a great place to start. Someone who's been successful in a business, someone like Han or the people who started Naver could easily do this at some point. In terms of the structure of venture capital, it is really different. So in the US, there's sort of the venture capital firms which take money from, say, mutual funds, pensions, institutional investors who have, say, $1 trillion on their assets. And they are a little more conservative. They tend to skew towards mid-tier to later. Not always. Sometimes they're all early. The major gap, I think, is the angel investor. There are literally hundreds of rich people in the U.S. who just give their money away with no strings attached, other than, say, 3 or 5% of equity. Peter Thiel, at the top left, did that in the case of Facebook. He gave, I believe, $500,000 to Mark Zuckerberg to start the company off and took 10% of equity in exchange. I interviewed some startup people here, and the difference is someone like Peter Thiel will take $500,000 for 10%. People here tend to take $50,000 for 50%. Like the math is just, it's almost, when I say it's like a predator, this is like a small rabbit biting off the flower. I think there has to be this notion that you want to get big. Everyone's on the same team. And what I see is a lot of people take advantage of, there's a little company coming up, Samsung's trying to take them out, the venture capitalists want to take half the company away so they make a little bit of money. It's like a swarm, I don't want to say swarm of bees because then it ruins my beautiful metaphor. It's like a swarm of hyenas or a swarm of bunnies. These jackrabbits come in and just start eating crazily. And I think it has to be more positive. One of the things I really focused on, which is I think the humanities side of this research, was the culture difference. So I look back at the 1960s at the countercultural movement this year, looking at how did Silicon Valley originally get constructed? How is the internet the way it is today? It's decentralized because people were countercultural who's created it and believe that no one should have power over anything. And that's why you can put on a computer on the internet and not tell anyone, and it's fine. It works. And I think in the Korean case, it's not that there's so much an anti-culture, it's just everyone's in it for themselves. And there's not yet been a realization that cooperation is going to be better than competition.
Playing with your garden metaphor, I think that it works quite well here. A couple of questions, which is whether your garden is natural garden or artificial garden.
In the case of Silicon Valley, one of the interesting things is it's an accident. A lot of people believe it's an accident of history. And one of the crucial parts of that has been the military funding back in the 50s that really provided a lot of the initial money. And that was just watering this whole garden without any intention of anything coming out of it, and suddenly finding out that a lot of things bloomed. And governments nowadays kind of create more artificial I would almost call them parterre gardens, where everything's beautifully manicured. You have these beautiful buildings, and they create a lot of the rules that are supposedly ideal. I think there needs to be less on innovation than actually solving the individual problems. One of the reasons why I like this metaphor, and it may not be best, but I think it's better than a lot of the metaphors people have used for innovation, is it emphasizes not so much the ecosystem as it is the individual parts of it. That without the bees, there are no flowers. But if you have too many bees, then they sort of die off, and then no one wants to be a bee. There's this kind of balance between each of the different parts. And so I think when we look at these sort of regions, there's only so much that anyone can artificially do. You can sort of create a little,
So that's why I think here is oxymoron, because your thinking is it's naturally growing, competitive, and helping with each other. But at the same time, garden itself, these days we don't really use garden for natural wild area. We talk about tulip garden. We talk about a special garden where you can visit, and as we said, carefully manicured and watered, and there are a lot of visible hands out there. But here you are saying that it's kind of ideal garden is like a Garden of Eden, and it's a natural garden just out there. So I feel like there is a bit of a tension, or it's how much. So that's why the part that you have missed, which is a policy. If you use the policy or policymaker as sort of big hands digging up and looking after all the flowers and plants, and then sometimes providing fertilizers, and then sometimes trying to have pollinators, and then there is something that keep the garden growing.
I think the major thing here is it's a scale issue. When you think about a garden in the backyard, to me that means sort of a company has their sort of skunk works. So for instance, Google has Google X, which is its like garden of, there's the autonomous cars, there's this Google Glass, they have this like universal translation service. So these are like really manicured, really specific gardens that we're doing in the backyard. Imagine you're actually the gardener for Deja, the entire city of Deja. Every flower in the city. I think that that's a better sense of the scale that I'm getting at. There is more than enough room for everyone to have space in it, but at the same time, you can't kind of manicure the whole city, not without everyone getting kind of involved in this process, which is not going to happen. The whole country's not going to be involved. And so when we think about scale, think of, say, 1 million flowers out there. There's only so much, you can't kill them all. They're sort of like weeds at times. And you can sort of manicure a part of it, you can sort of control a part of it. This is something what venture capitalists sort of do. They pick 60 companies they think are going to be successful. Well, those are the ones getting the water, those are the ones being given a lot of attention. But there's still this sort of whole natural area that's just not touched, because there's just not the ability, the manpower, so to speak, to do it. And so we are talking about a garden, but I do think a very expansive garden. And again, I don't want to sort of over-belabor the garden example, but I really do think it's a great model, because it shows both the artificial side of it, which happens all the time from everything from companies to venture capitalists, but also that seeds go from a dandelion, they blow over somewhere else, and suddenly, as an example, Elon Musk is an entrepreneur right now. He created PayPal, which is a processing system online, and then he created an electric car. And it's the first electric car, sportsmobile, that was actually usable. It can go from 0 to 100 in about 8 seconds. And now he's going to be the first person to dock a private spaceship to the International Space Station next week. And so when I talk about these kind of seeds and how they can go around from one garden, if you will, to another part of this ecosystem, that's what I'm getting at, is that it's not totally controlled. There are things you can't control. You can put in policies that make the dirt get better. You can ensure that it gets watered. You can ensure that it's irrigated. But at some point, there's just a wildness to it. And that's not to be ruined. That's the value of it. A wild garden, at least somewhat wild.
Danny, there's a risk here of thinking in terms of a garden in Korea versus a garden in Silicon Valley. But that's not the way the world really works. Like, you referred to a brain drain. I think the data, I think in the 1960s and 70s, there was a drain in the sense that you had huge numbers of Koreans getting their graduate degrees, and then they would go to work in the U.S. That pattern has reversed. You've got a lot of repatriating Koreans because Korea is a very comfortable place to live. And you've got 6 million plus Koreans, the diaspora, living all over the place. I mean, some of them may be U.S. citizens, some may be Chinese citizens, but if they're Korean, they're still part of they're overseas schools, nest, and so I'm wondering, where does the global element come in here? And this is not really a question, but the other thought that I have is a bit earlier, when the question came up of where will the innovators come from, in Korea. It just popped to my mind that 2 of my doctoral committee members at Stanford, I'm social science trained, 2 of them left the university within 5 years of my finishing the PhD to found very successful companies, innovative companies. One was Global Equatorial Communications Incorporated, the first high-powered satellite small dish data transmission company, Ed Parker. Another one was Bill Paisley and his wife formed a company to put encyclopedias on CD-ROM. I read about the discoveries being made at KAIST, for example. Graphene comes to mind, and some of I'm talking more broadly about Korea. I'm not sure if that came out of KAIST. But it seems to me that if you systematically pump money into R&D, and both basic R&D at the universities and also more applied in industry, that don't you get innovation at some point? I mean, as a product of that process? I mean, there probably will be a Nobel Prize at some point if the general trends continue.
I think one of the, this was probably October back with Professor Park, the other Professor Park, Mike Park. I was working on kind of university-industry relations and looking at technology transfer issues. This is really hard for universities, including American universities. Stanford is a very unique case study of a university that consistently has its faculty go and start companies. That is, even in the MIT case, is very exceptional. It is sort of a power law. If you look at the number of companies started by, say, Stanford versus MIT versus the rest, it quickly declines. I don't know of an example of KAIST faculty, I'm sure they exist, of KAIST faculty leaving the university to start companies. I am not familiar too much with that particular kind of entrepreneurship element. I have not heard of a lot of people. I guess, I don't know, did Anchal Su, was he a professor before he started on lab, or did he start on lab and then become a professor? He went that. See, I find that pattern happens a little more, that they do, that someone does well in a sort of an industry environment and comes back to the academy. I don't see a lot of scientists or engineers in Korea who really create fundamental research and then leave the university to go start a company to kind of commercialize it. And I don't know, again, I think it's these kind of exit opportunities. I think it's, can people build companies? It's this core thing across the whole piece here.
This may be a cultural thing here. A lot of things come back to language and culture. The longer I live in Korea, the more perplexed I am sometimes by this. But a longtime resident, lifelong resident of Korea, told me years ago, I was trying to do something up at Yonsei to get several departments to work together on a project. And this person, who is of the missionary community here, and told me, Jim, he said, just remember, there's very little history of lateral cooperation in Korea. Culturally speaking, it's more hierarchical. And so even within universities. But I think, here at KAIST, it seems like there is a conscious attempt almost to break that model, STP programs, being an example.
It's interesting. I mean, I haven't really translated. I have a long list of things about the Sanampyo kind of situation and the 100 signs that are across campus calling for his resignation today. I think there's a lot going on here that I don't really pay attention to behind the scenes, which I'm sure you know far more than I do. I looked more about 5-6 years ago to the last president when he was here, Robert Laughlin. I have all of his emails, which has been a kind of boon to understand Korean culture. You have 20,000 emails to kind of get an understanding of how people kind of interact in kind of political situation you deal with. I think there's a lot of talent here. I just think that there's not the multiplier that you sometimes get in the United States. When you look at faculty, there's a lot of opposition to change. There's a lot of opposition to, say, innovative teaching, to kind of doing things differently than how they were a few decades ago. And I think it's partly a shorter history of where the kind of higher education, KAIST is only an institution that's been here since kind of the 70s and kind of in its modern form since the 90s. And so these are really young institutions. And I think some of the kind of institutional glue that schools like Stanford or Harvard, which are 100 and 400 years old, just don't have yet. Where that will be, I don't know. I don't know if we're getting a new president at KAIST, probably at some point soon, from the sounds of it. But, that'll be number 2 that is out at KAIST. Robert Laughlin was forced out, and presumably the current president will be forced out at some point. And that really begs the question of who's going to be number 3. Because I think a lot of people will discount number 1. Hey, some guy, foreigner comes in, doesn't really know what he's doing, but here we have a Korean coming in, so it's somewhat different, but kind of enforces the same policies, and that was a disaster kind of too, so now what? And KAIST does need to reform. There are reforms that are needed in order to make the university as great as it can be. And I just don't know if the institutional momentum, if the capability of the institution is possible to do that. I got asked if KAIST should be privatized, which I don't think was a question that came up in some NPO, but did come up in Robert Laughlin's. He was really a proponent of privatization. I don't know if that's a solution. I'm not that enthusiastic about I don't think that solves a real cultural problem of getting everyone on the same page. I think that's more fundamental than just who owns the university, the government or private entity. So I think even like our own university here, if you look at research opportunities here in SDP, I think it's always a little political to research yourself a little bit, but at the same time, you have a lot of the resources right down the corner, so maybe even as a side project. And if you want the emails to read, I have the link.
Yeah, Laughlin published all of his emails. They're publicly available on the Stanford website. Yeah.
Fascinating.
I have one question. Can you mention
Probably the last question. Does anyone else have any questions? We're at 6:58, so.
Oh, that's all right. We have 10 minutes.
Okay.
Since you mentioned brain drain, I think as Korea it has been developed enough to think about issue from the brain drain side. So it's mean it's popped up to my mind that what is the role of foreigners in terms of innovation. So does Korea want to compete with America to attract more foreigners to their countries? Or if they does, what might be the policy to overcome the difficulties of the language?
So there's two sides to this, right? There's getting foreigners to come here, and then there's getting Koreans who are in the diaspora to come back. The Koreans in the diaspora, I don't think the argument is too hard to make. The culture, language, family is all ready to go. It's more about the economic opportunity, but I think Professor Larson is correct in saying that some later stage career sort of faculty and scientists are starting to return back from the United States to Korea. They don't tend to be the young ones, but people later in their careers are starting to come back more. In terms of foreigners themselves, I think this is a really challenging problem. I've had very little issue. I don't know, I guess SP has been such a great home and everyone's been so helpful, and Yanshu, who just left, was the one who really helped the first 2 days in getting everything set up from banking to credit cards to transportation cards and everything in between. I don't really think it's that hard. Yanshil, I just gave you a compliment. Thank you so much for helping opening my bank account on the first day. I still have this image of walking down the endless road. On my first dinner at KAIST, it was like 95 degrees, the humidity was off the charts, and of the cicadas, you know, the really loud buzzing going and being like, and walking by all the apartment buildings down there and being like, this is a totally different place from California. But anyway, we sort of reminisce already at the end. But I don't think it's a great lifestyle here. Again, it's about the economic opportunities. I can't really push this hard enough. If you want people to come, this has to be the place that people make money in. That's it. Silicon Valley is not attractive because of the nice weather. It's attractive because as a college graduate out of a nice university, you can make $150,000 a year. Everyone. There are thousands of people who will come to Silicon Valley and make salaries that are in the top 5% in the United States straight out from undergrad. And if you're later in your career, you can make $500,000 by showing up to work 9 to 5. It is unique in the world that you can make that kind of money. And when I looked at Korea, I asked the Samsung people, I asked how much money could I make here, and it is not the same. It is not that close. And until you make the economic argument that this is the place that people should go, they're not going to show up. I think people are fairly rational, maybe within 10-20%. I came on Fulbright and gave up money to come here, but I don't think people will do that permanently. And so there has to be the economic opportunities here. It's arguable whether it's cyclical. Like, it could be that in order to make a lot of money, we have to get a lot of people here first. And so, how do we get that going? I personally think that there are more than enough Koreans who are smart and capable of starting companies. And as you start companies, if they start drawing people in, it's not going to be a problem. It'll just start naturally. I don't think there has to be this huge kind of foreigner policy to try to encourage talent overseas. I think if the money is there, people just show up. It's quite interesting, but that's the beauty of capitalism and sort of the globalization we've seen over the last 20 years. People look for opportunities everywhere. One of my close friends, who is really a top engineer from my graduating class, now works in Beijing for Baidu.
Well, there you go, because on the education side, in terms of foreigners, bringing them here, what you see happening at KAIST, I mean, the students that I had in the Introduction to Mass Communication class were from Vietnam, France. It was really an interesting mix. Australia, Korea, of course, Korean American. I mean, the discussion that's going on here has a lot of implications, I think, including the question of the overriding issue of Korean reunification, how and when that will occur. And that's going to have a huge impact on Korea as a study abroad destination. But the demographics in Korea will dictate efforts by the government and by universities to recruit more and more foreign students. So it's interesting.
I just want to, it's not really related to your talk, but just out of curiosity, because what you're saying is the beautiful garden for innovators, because it's an innovation garden, right? But if we, if we expand the notion of garden to other areas other than innovators, what I'm trying to say is that California, especially the Silicon Valley, that area is great for innovators. But what about others? Because recently California is almost broke, and it's in debt, and what's the problem? Because there are so many innovators and entrepreneurs and billionaires, and but at the same time they cannot take care of themselves. So it's a garden not just for innovators, but for all the people thinking in that way. What's the problem for I'm not blaming all the innovative companies there, but because they probably contribute a lot as tax. But so
The problem in California.
Yeah, it's kind of an innovative policy within a big social and then social policy and other big.
Very much so,
context.
and I think your question embodies, it includes the education sector. If you look at what's happened to Berkeley and the Cal State system and so forth.
So there's a couple of things to know about California. One is Prop 13, which was passed in the early 70s, mandated that property taxes could never increase on any home from that date forward. It's provided that the owner stayed in that house. And so sometimes there are literally multi-million-dollar houses in which people are paying $100 in taxes, and they should be paying $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And so there's a huge problem in California with tax revenue. Most revenue comes from income taxes, which is very unique among sort of states in the United States. Some states get a lot of money from gas. Texas and Alaska would be those kind of states. But California is one of the few that actually relies mostly on income taxes. So like right now, when the economy goes down, California's taxes go way down as well. And so in one part, there's just not this kind of tax collection. The second is the balloting system. We allow people to vote on laws. On laws. They're called ballot initiatives. In some cases, there may be 20 or 30 laws on the ballot a year. And literally the ballot is this thick, because each law has to be explained, the text of the law has to be published, and you have to have access to that in the ballot box. And so special interests are able to really advertise heavily for laws that they want. So for instance, California spends more money on prisons than it does on the education system, for higher education. They spend about 11% on prisons and about 9% on universities. Or as Arnold Schwarzenegger said, we spend more on orange gowns than we do on captain gowns. We spend more on prisoners, because one of the most powerful lobbies in California is the prison lobby. Both private companies who own prisons, which is something that we use in the United States. Companies, you can invest in a prison company, you can invest, and their policy and their lobbying is to encourage more crime. This is not a joke. They encourage tougher penalties on crimes. They encourage more crimes, more criminals, because that means more revenue for them. It's very odd, right, from a societal standpoint, but this kind of issue in California. And so while the innovation works really well in Silicon Valley and Hollywood works really well in Los Angeles, the political system in California has been very damaged, really beyond any kind of recognition. Our current governor is Jerry Brown in California, and he was last governor during the late 70s, actually just the 70s, probably when you were...
way back.
Back when you were a PhD student. He was California's governor, one of the youngest at the time. And he's come back to kind of help the state out 30, 40 years later. And basically he has said that he doesn't know what to do because the state does not look like anything it looked like 30, 40 years ago. It's helpless. And we've now had kind of 3 governors come through who have all had issues. And there's a lot of fear that the California government itself is sort of going towards bankruptcy. And as it would be considered the 8th largest economy in the world, it's actually, California itself is larger than Korea in terms of its economic power. And so a bankruptcy on the scale of Korea, which you went through in '97, is not something we're looking forward to. On a secondary note, though, I want to emphasize that Silicon Valley itself is very concerned about innovation, that so many people are focused on social networking, which makes no money, and there are literally dozens and dozens of people who have started dozens and dozens of companies. There's a real concern that we're not actually building anything new, that we actually haven't solved, say, flying cars, we don't have men on the moon, on a moon base, we don't have jetpacks, we don't have a cure for cancer, we don't have batteries that last forever. We essentially have nothing that came from the 1960s. All we have is a phone that allows me to post status updates about latte purchases at the coffee shop. And so there's a real concern that we actually have not done much recently, that maybe we're going down the wrong path. I don't know how much to take from that. There are other cities that are working on biotech, that are working on media. This is New York, this is San Diego. So I think while we always talk about Silicon Valley, I think there's always openings. The history of Silicon Valley has been new industries have come up every 10 years, and we haven't had one in the last 5, which should be coming up. And so there's a real worry that we're not going to catch the next wave. If we don't, someone else is going to. And suddenly we're not going to talk about Silicon Valley, we're going to talk about Bio Diego or something.
Well, at least you didn't, in answering Professor Pak, you didn't sugarcoat it. I mean, California is an example, because of the Proposition 13, of a policy failure unfolding right there, Hollywood and LA and all, Silicon Valley notwithstanding. But as an American citizen, it's it ranks, the state is so large that it ranks with policy failures at the national level. So I think your question is right.
Why did I ask that question? Because I had inspiration from Jeremy Rifkin's lecture the other day, and he mentioned that the European model of success is different from the American model of success. It's entrepreneurship and innovation, something new for individuals. But in the European, it's community first, and then how society will change with that initiative and so on. So it's two different models, so in your garden of innovation, it's very successful, but nearby there are people who are not getting water and other things like that. And then whereas in Europe, probably more taking care of others, and so it's a different model, I guess, of innovation.
I think it's very important to emphasize that you are empowered to encourage the values you want in the political system. There are many ways to build a social and political system. There are different levels of, say, social security. You see that in Korea between the two different parties and what their different approaches are to the future. There's also the difference between the United States and Europe, where the United States tends to take hands off, kind of the libertarian, the government shouldn't be involved, let the private sector do its thing, versus Europe tends to be much more bureaucratic. For instance, in France, there are 5 million people who are part of the national government. It's about 10% of the country works just for the government itself, the national government. And so there's just a very large range. I really like Jung Ha-jun, who writes a little bit of a counter to some of the kind of capitalism and some of the myths that kind of come out of the United States. I really think it's important to really think hard about what you want. Because I think a lot of people want Silicon Valley innovation, but then they're not really willing to give up. There's a downside to it. And so I think you have to pick where in that kind of constellation, where in that sort of spectrum you want to be. And as young people, you are the next generation that's going to come through, and you have a lot of power to kind of think about this early and kind of build up your own beliefs and opinions on this topic, and really execute them in sort of policy roles or in the political realm, if that's a career path you choose to do. But I think you do a little bit of this in terms of values and kind of philosophy, but I think this is where STP really offers a lot. At an engineering university like KAIST, and this is an engineering institute, MIT, is still only about 50% engineering these days. And it's far more than just kind of the engineering disciplines. It's very important to get the kind of value-driven background that engineering does not provide. If I think most of you or many of you have engineering backgrounds, and kind of technocracy or technocratic kind of approaches, that there is a right way, there's an optimal way, we can optimize for this, we can use math to kind of calculate what the best is. But oftentimes we have other goals, things like equity, justice, that don't really work well with kind of the engineering mindset. And so when you go forward and you think about these topics, I do encourage you to get the full expanse of those views and figure out exactly where you stand. Me personally, I am relatively libertarian, I'm relatively with an engineering kind of mindset, but I also realize there is an extent at which I stop and kind of take a more holistic, kind of equitable view towards it. Peter Thiel, the one at the top left on that picture of kind of LinkedIn and these people who are really powerful in Silicon Valley, is one of the most libertarian people in the country. He wants every social structure removed, because everything it hurts. And it's interesting, but he does kind of policies. He encourages people to drop out and funds them. He funds people to drop out of universities because he thinks it's a waste of time. And a lot of these students are actually going to go back. And so I think it's very important to realize there's only an extent to which you can use. And figuring that out for yourself, I think, is one of the most important things you learn in higher education. is your value system.
So, I guess for this is ready, and we can continue our discussion with our special guest.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the class.